Well, Governor Patterson's numbers are continuing to decline again. He is approaching near record low numbers by every measure. His favorable, unfavorable rating is now 29% favorable, 59% unfavorable. In terms of the job performance, how people view the job David Patterson is doing as governor, it's even worse. 18% have a positive view of his job performance compared to 80% who have a negative view. Again, near record low numbers for the governor. Well, I mean, first, just looking at the raw numbers a year before the 2010 gubernatorial election, right now only 14% of New Yorkers are prepared to elect David Patterson to a full 4-year term, compared to 71% who would prefer to vote for someone else. When matched up against potential candidates, in a Democratic primary, he loses to the Attorney General, Andrew Cuomo, by more than 40 points at this point. He loses to former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani in a general election overwhelmingly, and he barely beats, with less than 40% support right now, barely beats newly anointed candidate or newly announced candidate, former Long Island Congressman Rick Lazio, if they run Democrat versus Republican. Well, the former New York City Mayor, Rudy Giuliani, is very well known across the state, very popular, particularly in upstate New York and in downstate suburban New York. Ironically, he's least popular in New York City, where he served as mayor for 8 years. But right now, if he were to run in a general election against David Patterson for governor, he would beat Patterson handily. If, however, it is Giuliani versus Attorney General Andrew Cuomo for governor next year, right now Cuomo has a 13-point lead over Giuliani. But what's interesting is Siena asked voters, do you think that Mayor Giuliani should run for governor in 2010? Should he run for United States Senator in 2010? Or should he not run for any office in 2010? And what the voters told Siena, half of them, nearly half of them, said they'd prefer Giuliani not run for anything. About a quarter each said he should run for governor next year and Senate next year. More than half of the voters of the state of New York are unfamiliar with former Congressman Rick Lazio. Lazio ran against Hillary Clinton back in 2000 when she was seeking her first term in the U.S. Senate. She won that race handily. Lazio, a former congressman from Long Island, declared today that he is running for governor of New York. 53% of New Yorkers don't know enough about him to have a view one way or the other. Among those who know them, sort of even between those who have a favorable view of Rick Lazio and those who have an unfavorable view of Rick Lazio. Well, Siena read voters a list of 8 statements about David Patterson, Governor Patterson, and asked voters whether they agree with those statements or disagree with those statements. And I think that the predominant finding from those questions is that voters believe that David Patterson is well-intentioned, but that he's ineffective and isn't getting the job done. They think he's off the mark fiscally in terms of his handling of state finances. They think he is a good person, but that he is not doing a good job as governor of the state of New York. Well, the top 3 issues, and Siena asked voters to choose among 7 different issues what they thought would be the most important issue going into the 2010 gubernatorial election. And the top 3 issues are jobs, reforming state government, and taxes. The traditional issues of health, education, crime, the environment, they really take a back seat to the big 3. Jobs and taxes, 2 important economic issues for voters during these tough economic times, and reforming state government, which is certainly a reflection of what has gone on in government and politics in New York State over the last several months, several years. We asked voters to help provide advice to the governor and legislature on how to close the bigger than $2 billion deficit the state is currently facing. More than half of the voters suggested ways of cutting spending to close the deficit. About a third of the voters said that various taxes ought to be raised to close the deficit. What's interesting, however, is that the largest single answer, about a third of voters said the state, to close the deficit, should cut spending for local governments. That's cities and counties and towns and villages across the state who rely on either state aid or property taxes generally to support their local government efforts. So I think voters are giving the legislature and governor advice that they may have a difficult time following.